The house was quiet after Mark left, but the silence was suffocating rather than comforting. Sarah paced the living room, her mind racing with fragments of overheard conversations and the heavy weight of unspoken truths. Daniel sat on the couch, shoulders slumped, staring at the floor, his hands clasped tightly together. For the first time in years, Sarah saw a side of him she had never witnessed, a vulnerability that made him almost unrecognizable. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I need you to tell me everything, right now. No more hiding." He flinched at the request, as though the words themselves carried a physical weight. He looked at her, eyes filled with a mixture of guilt, fear, and longing, and finally, after what felt like an eternity, he began to speak. Daniel admitted that the woman in the photograph had not just been a friend from his past. She had been someone he loved deeply, someone who had meant more to him than he had ever admitted aloud. Their relationship had been intense but complicated, shaped by circumstances neither of them had fully controlled. Then, years ago, she had disappeared suddenly, leaving Daniel haunted by guilt and uncertainty. For a long time, he had believed her absence was somehow his fault, a consequence of choices he had made that night. He confessed that Mark had been his confidant during that time, the only person who knew the full story. Mark had guided him, helped him navigate the guilt and confusion, but had also urged him to keep it hidden from everyone else, including Sarah. Daniel had obeyed, fearing that revealing the truth would shatter the life they had built together and destroy the trust between him and Sarah. Sarah felt a tumult of emotions, anger at the years of secrecy, sadness for the pain Daniel had carried alone, and empathy for the man sitting before her, vulnerable and raw. She realized that Daniel's silence had not been malicious, but protective. He had wanted to shield her from a painful truth while battling his own fears and regrets. As Daniel spoke, tears welled in his eyes. He described the fear, the sleepless nights, and the constant questioning of whether he had done enough, whether he had made the right choices. Sarah reached out and took his hand, feeling the tremor in his fingers, the palpable tension that had been simmering under the surface for years. The confession did not resolve everything, but it was a beginning. The weight of the past had been placed into the light, and though the path forward was uncertain, Sarah understood the courage it had taken for Daniel to finally speak. She realized that love was not just built on shared joys, but on confronting fears together, on facing truths, however painful, with honesty and empathy. That night, as they sat together in the dim glow of the living room, Sarah and Daniel faced the reality of the past. It was messy, it was painful, but it was theirs to navigate together. And in that moment, Sarah knew that while the night had revealed secrets, it had also revealed the resilience of their bond and the possibility of healing together. The following morning, the tension from the previous night still hung in the air like a heavy fog. Sarah and Daniel had spent hours talking, trying to unpack the confession Daniel had shared. There was a fragile sense of relief in having the secret finally spoken, but questions remained, and a lingering unease hinted that the night's revelations were far from over. Then, without warning, Mark returned. Daniel answered the door, surprised, and Sarah followed closely behind, curiosity and apprehension warring in her mind. Mark stepped inside, his demeanor calm but urgent, and for a moment the air seemed charged with anticipation. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Instead, he cut straight to the matter at hand. "I had to come back," Mark said, his voice steady but firm. "There's something you both need to know. The woman from the photograph, she's alive." Sarah skipped a beat, and Daniel's hand gripped hers instinctively. Alive? After all these years? After the fear and guilt that had haunted Daniel, she had assumed the story ended in loss and silence. Mark continued. She left, yes, but it wasn't because of him, Mark explained, glancing at Daniel. It was a situation entirely of her own making. She needed to disappear to protect herself from people who were dangerous. Daniel has carried guilt for years that never should have been his burden. For the first time in 15 years, Daniel felt a flicker of relief and disbelief. The guilt that had weighed so heavily on him suddenly shifted, replaced by a complicated mix of hope and anxiety. Sarah, meanwhile, felt a surge of empathy for both men, relief that the truth had finally surfaced, but also concern for what might come next. Mark's purpose for returning became clear. He was not just a messenger of the past. He was a bridge between what had been and what might still be. He revealed that the woman had recently reached out to him, leaving a message that she wanted to reconnect with Daniel, but cautiously. She had not forgotten him, nor had she intended to hurt him, but she needed Mark's guidance to ensure their reunion would be safe and manageable. Sarah watched as Daniel absorbed this news, emotions flickering across his face, shock, relief, and the hint of hope that had been absent for years. The realization that he had been carrying unnecessary guilt left him visibly shaken, yet lighter, as though a burden he had borne alone for so long had finally been lifted. But Mark also warned them, while the woman was safe, reconnecting could stir complications from her past, people who might not welcome her return. The message was clear. The reunion would not be simple, and caution was essential. As Mark left again, promising to keep them informed, Sarah and Daniel were left alone in the quiet of their home. The revelation had changed everything. The past, once a source of fear and secrecy, now held a possibility for healing, closure, and perhaps a new chapter. Sarah realized that while surprises and secrets had defined the night, the bond she shared with Daniel was stronger for having faced them together. The day ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Sarah and Daniel felt a sense of readiness. They would face the next steps as a team, knowing that even the most shocking truths could be confronted with trust, patience, and love. By sunrise, the house felt unusually still. The events of the previous night and morning had left Sarah and Daniel in a state of quiet reflection. While the revelation of Daniel's long-hidden secret and Mark's unexpected return had shaken them both, it had also created an opportunity, a chance to face the past and navigate the future together, unburdened by years of secrecy and misunderstanding. After a long night of conversation, they sat together in the living room, holding hands, drinking coffee, and trying to make sense of what had happened. Daniel's usual reserved demeanor had softened, replaced by a tentative openness that Sarah hadn't seen before. For the first time in years, he seemed unafraid to let her into the corners of his life he had previously kept locked away. Sarah reflected on everything she had learned. The woman from Daniel's past, once thought lost or gone forever, was alive and seeking to reconnect. The revelation that Daniel had carried guilt for something that was never truly his fault had cast their shared history in a new light. Sarah realized that trust was not merely about knowing every detail, but about understanding the intentions behind the hidden truths. Daniel had kept this from her not to deceive, but to protect both her and the life they had built together. The question now loomed. What should they do about the woman reaching out? Daniel admitted his fear of reopening old wounds and complicating their lives, while Sarah acknowledged her own mixed emotions, jealousy, curiosity, and a deep desire to support Daniel. They spoke candidly about boundaries, intentions, and expectations, each realizing that the strength of their bond would be measured not by the absence of secrets, but by their ability to navigate challenges together. Despite the uncertainty, a sense of unity emerged. Sarah and Daniel decided that whatever steps they took next would be deliberate, measured, and undertaken as a team. They agreed to communicate openly, to face any potential complications from the woman's return with honesty and calm, and to protect their marriage as their top priority. The past, once a source of fear, had now become a shared responsibility, one they could face together rather than in isolation. Mark had left the night before, promising to keep them informed of any developments. And though his presence was gone, his role as a catalyst for clarity remained. The couple realized that Mark's return, while disruptive, had been necessary. Sarah had been looking forward to a quiet weekend. After a busy week of work and household responsibilities, she and her husband, Daniel, were planning a simple evening at home. Just dinner, a movie, and some well-deserved relaxation. She had spent the afternoon preparing a light meal, arranging the table, and lighting a few candles to make the house feel warm and inviting. It was the kind of ordinary evening that felt comforting after years of routine. But the moment Daniel's phone buzzed, the calm of the evening shifted. He glanced at the screen and paused, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Sarah noticed immediately. Something about his expression was unusual. "It's Mark," Daniel said finally, his voice hesitant. "He's in town, just for tonight. Wants to stop by for dinner." Sarah raised her eyebrows. "Mark? The Mark from your childhood? The one who convinced you to climb the barn roof? The one you said got you into trouble more times than I can count?" Daniel nodded, though there was a strange tension in his posture. "That's him. Haven't seen him in over 15 years. He just wants to catch up." Sarah felt a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Over the years, she had heard endless stories about Mark, how he was daring, impulsive, and at times reckless. Yet he was also the friend who had always had Daniel's back, the one who had pulled him out of trouble more than once. She had never met him in person, but she had an image in her mind of a wild, chaotic figure. She couldn't help but wonder what he would be like now, so many years later. Despite her curiosity, Sarah also sensed that Daniel was uneasy. He seemed excited, yet tense, as if anticipating something he couldn't quite explain. When she asked if he wanted Mark to come over, he hesitated, the pause loaded with unspoken thoughts, before finally agreeing. When the doorbell rang, Sarah's heart fluttered with anticipation. Daniel opened the door, and there stood Mark, but not as the wild teenager she had imagined. He was taller, calmer, and carried an air of quiet confidence. His eyes were sharp and observant, scanning the living room as if taking in every detail. When he greeted Sarah, his handshake was firm, yet oddly gentle, and his smile was polite but held a hint of something deeper, something unspoken. As the three of them settled into the living room, Sarah noticed a subtle tension between Daniel and Mark. Their conversation was friendly, but beneath the laughter and casual stories, there was a hidden undercurrent, a familiarity that carried unspoken history. It was clear that Mark's visit wasn't just a casual reunion. He had a purpose, something that had lingered for years and was now resurfacing unexpectedly. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that tonight's dinner, which she had imagined as ordinary, would take a turn she couldn't yet anticipate. Something about the way Mark looked at Daniel and the way Daniel looked back told her that old secrets, long buried, were about to emerge, and she would be right in the middle of them. Dinner began under the glow of the candles Sarah had carefully arranged. She had prepared a comforting meal of roasted vegetables and herb-seasoned chicken, with a simple dessert waiting to be served afterward. At first, the conversation flowed easily. Mark told stories from his and Daniel's youth, pranks, adventures, and mishaps that left Sarah laughing. Daniel chuckled along, though there was a faint stiffness in his laughter, as if he were carefully navigating a minefield of memory. Sarah tried to engage Mark in light conversation as well, asking about his travels and work. He answered politely but briefly, always redirecting the discussion back to Daniel. There was a deliberate curiosity in the way Mark spoke, as though he were probing gently, testing Daniel's reactions without appearing confrontational. His eyes were sharp, attentive, and unrelenting in their focus, and Sarah couldn't help but notice the subtle tension building between the two men. As the meal progressed, the tone began to shift. The playful stories gave way to more personal questions. Mark asked Daniel about his choices over the years, about paths not taken, friendships lost, and the way life had changed him since they last met. "Have you ever regretted any of the decisions you made?" he asked, his voice calm but probing. Daniel's responses were careful and measured, short and vague, often accompanied by nervous glances toward Sarah, as if silently asking her to stay oblivious, yet the unease in his posture betrayed him. Sarah felt a growing sense of discomfort. Mark's attention was frequently drawn to a framed photograph on the wall, Daniel with a young woman Sarah did not recognize. He studied it silently, and when Daniel's eyes flickered toward it as well, Sarah sensed a charged, unspoken connection. Something about that image carried weight, a history she had no knowledge of. The air at the table became thick with tension, subtle yet undeniable. Even as Sarah tried to maintain a casual, cheerful demeanor, she realized that Mark's visit was not simply about reminiscing. He seemed to be gently prying into Daniel's past, and Daniel was cautiously guarding a secret. Every question, every glance, every pause between the two men suggested layers of story Sarah had yet to uncover. By the time dessert was served, the light-hearted atmosphere of the evening had vanished entirely. Mark's probing continued, though now with an undercurrent of urgency. Daniel's attempts to redirect the conversation were met with Mark's unwavering focus, his calm but insistent gaze suggesting that he knew more than he should about Daniel's hidden past. Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. She realized that this dinner was not just a casual reunion. It was a prelude to something far more serious. The night, which had begun as ordinary, was building toward a revelation that would change everything. Whatever secrets had remained buried for years between Daniel and Mark were on the verge of surfacing, and Sarah knew instinctively that she was about to witness the start of a storm that could reshape their lives forever. After dinner, Sarah excused herself to the kitchen under the pretense of clearing the table. But she couldn't ignore the low, urgent tones drifting from the living room. She leaned against the counter, heart pounding, straining to catch fragments of the conversation. "You never told her, did you?" Mark's voice was steady but carried an edge, a hint of urgency. Daniel's response was quieter, almost strained. "I didn't think it was the right time or the right way. She didn't need to know." Sarah froze. Her hands clutched the edge of the counter. She didn't need to know? Whatever they were talking about, it was clearly serious, something Daniel had been hiding for years. She had always assumed that any secrets from Daniel's past were minor, funny stories, youthful mistakes, or fleeting romances. But these words suggested something heavier, something that could change how she saw him entirely. The conversation continued, muffled by the doorway, but enough words slipped through to set Sarah's mind racing. "It wasn't supposed to follow you here," Mark said sharply. "You should have warned her." Sarah's pulse quickened. Whatever this "it" was, it had crossed paths with their present. The past, long buried, had now found its way into their home. She felt a mixture of fear and curiosity, wondering who was involved and why Daniel had kept it hidden for so long. When Sarah re-entered the living room, both men immediately paused, their expressions carefully controlled. Mark's eyes softened, almost apologetically, while Daniel's jaw tightened, a mixture of guilt and anxiety flickering across his face. The silence that fell over the room was heavy, laden with the weight of unspoken history. Mark broke it first, his voice calm but serious. "There's someone from the past, someone you thought you lost, Daniel. It's time she be brought into the light, one way or another." Daniel looked at Sarah, his eyes pleading for understanding, for patience. Slowly, haltingly, he began to speak. He explained that the woman in the photograph, the one Sarah had glimpsed earlier, was more than just a figure from his past. She had been someone he deeply cared for, someone whose sudden absence had left a lasting impact on him. The circumstances of her disappearance had been shrouded in fear, shame, and a web of complex consequences, and for years he had carried that burden alone, believing it was safer to leave the past buried. Sarah felt a rush of emotions, surprise, confusion, and a hint of hurt that Daniel had kept such a significant part of his life hidden from her. Yet beneath the initial shock, she also sensed the depth of his fear, the weight of guilt he had silently carried for so many years. Mark's presence now made sense. He hadn't come merely to reconnect with an old friend. He had come as a messenger, a bridge between past and present, to ensure that the unresolved story that had haunted Daniel for years finally saw the light of day. As Sarah listened,